Hello and welcome. Today let's look at a national topic. The presidential election is on, and that is the topic of discussion. It is well known that the nominee of the ruling party will anyway win. Why then should the opposition put up a candidate when that candidate is sure to lose? That answer lies with a man called Kaka Joginder Singh Dhartipakad. Let us look at his life today. The presidential election, as we all know, is not by universal adult franchise. The election is through an electoral college with the elected representatives of the legislative councils, the legislative assemblies, the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha all voting for the president. It goes without saying that the party which is in power will be successful in its candidate. Sometimes there have been close shaves. In 1969, for instance, when the Congress nominated Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy as its candidate, the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, though she was a Congressperson herself, was not in favor of his candidacy. V.V. Giri was made to stand as an independent, and Mrs. Gandhi asked the congressmen to vote as per conscience. Finally, Giri was voted into office. This would lead to a lot of discontent within the Congress, and many years later, it would lead to a split in the party as well. But by and large, it is the ruling party's candidate who has won. But why then does the opposition insist on putting up a candidate? For instance, this year, we have seen the name of Sharad Pawar, then we've seen the name of Gopal Krishna Gandhi, and they all refused. And finally, the candidacy came to Yashwant Sinha. Why does the opposition want a candidate? Well, that is part of democratic principles. The opposition is well within its right to put up a candidate to oppose. Just because the ruling party is in a majority, it does not mean that it can get away with everything. There has to be a show of opposition, at least on a matter of principle, and that is why this happens. If you look at the list of candidates who have been nominated by the opposition for presidential elections across history, it's quite impressive. We've had H.R. Khanna, who was a Supreme Court judge and who stood against the emergency. Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, who stood in opposition to R. Venkatraman, who was then the Congress party candidate. We have had people like T.N. Seshan, who opposed K.R. Narayanan, and several others. A very, very impressive list. But all of these pale into insignificance in front of Kaka Joginder Singh Dhartipakad. He stood for election 350 times in India and lost each one of them. It is a record of sorts. Nobody will know of him if you ask for Kaka Joginder Singh, but Dhartipakad will immediately bring him to memory. In Indian style wrestling, the defeated wrestler falls on the ground and then remains on the ground till the counting is over, and that is known as holding the earth in Hindi, Dhartipakad. It's a sign of defeat, and Kaka Joginder Singh was defeated so many times that became a suffix to his name. He was born in Gujranwala in present-day Pakistan, and later the family moved to Bareilly, where they ran a successful textile business. Kaka Joginder Singh ran it himself. He had a habit of distributing sweets to whoever came to his shop, and he was very successful in business. But he had this quirk: he had to stand for election, and no matter what the election was, you would be sure to find his nomination. And he always stood as an independent candidate. When he would go around campaigning, he would give sweets, and when he was defeated, he would give sweets as well. There was no stopping the man. In the 1960s, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, then the Prime Minister of India, invited Kaka Joginder Singh to stand as a Congress candidate, but Kaka refused. He said that it was his right to stand for election, it was his right to be defeated, and it was not necessary that everybody had to win an election. You had to oppose on matters of principle, and therefore he would file his nomination. And each time he would lose his deposit because he would not get the minimum number of votes, and that too he would say was a responsible right. He was giving that money as a donation to the country so that some good work would be done by the government of India with that money. Kaka Joginder Singh Dhartipakad really shot into the news in the 1990s when he announced that he would oppose the presidential election of Shankar Dayal Sharma. He stood as an independent, and I still remember that he was interviewed by India Today or one of those magazines, and there he listed all his principles about why he was standing, etc. And then he also said that I get security, I get a government vehicle, plus I get a telephone connection for 45 days. For people of this generation, you wouldn't even know what that meant. But when I grew up, a telephone connection took 15 years. You applied for it, and then you waited and you waited and you waited. Eventually, you got a telephone line. Today, the telephone line comes within 15 minutes of an application. That is how things have changed. But Kaka Joginder Singh really understood what was needed to get a telephone line. He was defeated in that election, expectably so, and he lost his deposit, but that did not prevent him from standing for the vice president's election, where K.R. Narayanan was the Congress candidate and he opposed him. Narayanan secured 700 votes, Kaka Joginder Singh got 1. He was defeated on a ratio of 700:1. But he never gave up on his democratic right to stand for election. When we go and vote, we need to remember people like Kaka Joginder Singh, to whom winning did not matter, but it was more the electoral process and the victory of democracy itself. Surely he is a character to be commemorated. See you later.